Good evening, Professor. Good evening, class. This is David Maxwell, otherwise known as Maxie. And tonight I'll be discussing with you Thomas Kidd's book, or the fifth chapter of the book, and George Whitfield and his tour of North America. He had a bunch of tours across North America, and he was considered, you could say, one of the first great rock stars. I'm not saying he was a rock star like Judas Priest, no pun intended, or Motley Crue, or anything like that, but it was more of the crowds that he drew. Uh, there is this experiment that Ben Franklin spoke about where he really wanted to see if he could hear George Whitfield's voice uh, in these large crowds because they would back up on the streets of Philadelphia. And he went out, he kept walking until he couldn't go any further, until he couldn't hear the voice. And he estimated that there was probably a good 30,000 people in that crowd. And that's pretty amazing to think about what the population was at Philadelphia at the time. So this is the fourth class I've actually had the pleasure to write about George Whitfield, and I feel like I'm starting to get to know the guy and the good Reverend a little bit better. So this includes both graduate and undergraduate coursework at my time here at Liberty. So it's also, I'm glad to have the chance to work with the Reverend Whitfield again. He was really good at using the printed material to publicize his travels, his events, and the things that he did. So, some of the modern historiography says that he, more or so than his speaking style, his Calvinist theology, that he was popular because of his ability to get the word out that he was coming. He was well known. He drew these large crowds, and he took advantage of the pamphlets at the time. Just in our class for the latest reading, we read the importance of the printed material, so printed pamphlets and newspapers and magazines, and how it was used during the build up to the American Revolution. And I think that George Whitfield took advantage of all these publications. And of course, Ben Franklin was one of the people that worked with him to support these speaking appearances. And I think I remember reading in the book that, let's see, I took some notes, that Franklin published 43 books and pamphlets on just on George Whitfield's speaking engagements alone. Uh, but George Whitfield's American tours reminds me of Paul's walks around the Mediterranean. While modern historians tend to look at the aforementioned use of media to publicize where Whitfield was going to be, I believe he still was an amazing preacher. Although not everybody thinks that this is the case. If we look at Kidd's chapter 5, where he writes of um, George Whitfield's American tour, he discusses uh, the the nature of all the places that he went to, how these crowds still continued to come to see him. So whether or not it was George Whitfield's so-called, his good looks, as they discuss, or his speaking style that people said sounded like music when he was talking, he was still an amazing preacher who knew the word. He knew his theology, although it was Calvinistic. He preached scripture, and everything that I've read so far about him says it always seemed like he was well rehearsed, or that he just went out and preached without using notes, while other people, his contemporaries at the time, seemed monotone and were going over it and over it. George Whitfield was this bright, shining light of an orator, of a preacher that delivered scriptures where people were interested and wanted to hear what he had to say. If nothing else, GW, not George Washington, but George Whitfield, uh, he captivated people, right? They were interested. They wanted to hear what he had to say, regardless of any theological um, leanings or his back and forth relationship with slavery, his philanthropy, excuse me on that one. But he had a complex relationship with the philanthropy and the slavery. But he was a man of God. He continued to travel the American Atlantic seaboard and preach the word. And he did it effectively. He reached, I think it said somewhere in Kidd's book that half the population of the colonists of America heard George Whitefield speak at one time or other. So whether or not he took advantage, which we know he did take advantage of the printed material to publicize his tours, he used it effectively. People came to see him, and they got to hear scripture. I hope I fulfilled the requirements for this assignment. Thank you very much, and I'm going to bed. Good night.